Hi, so welcome back to my Craft of Writing series, and we're going to jump right into editing and revising your manuscript. So that's another question I have gotten a lot from readers. How do you edit and revise? But mostly from aspiring authors, and even sometimes established authors will get together and we'll just sit and chat, like, how do you do your edits? How do you do your revisions? Is there a better way? So I'm just going to talk about my process and maybe some of the advice I've gotten over the years. I know I had said in my how to write a book video that I would get into edits, but really that video is getting a little bit too long, so we're giving it its own spot, and that's this. So let's get to editing. First of all, editing raw writing. For me, and you may do this quite differently. Some people write the entire book before they do any edits. Some people revise and revise and revise and revise to perfection before they move on to the next bit. That's not how I work. How I work has changed over the years. Some of the things that I used to not do instinctively, I now do, so I'm not editing for those things. Some things I've never quite learned to do instinctively, so I'm still going to having to go back in and edit for those things. And that's okay. Whatever your process is, whatever my process is, what is important is at the end of the book, your book is well edited. It is a clean manuscript. It is a well thought out, and it is a cohesive manuscript. So what I do is I write first. So say day one, I'll sit down and I'll write anywhere from 5 to 25 pages. I don't give myself a page goal necessarily every day because it's a mental health issue for me. I have 6 months out of the year where I'm creatively productive, and during those 6 months, maybe, sometimes I only have 4, if I get too much pressure, if I put too much pressure on myself to write too much in a day, I can actually shut myself down, and it'll be a week before I can get back to the writing. So I no longer write to deadlines. It's just a whole different process. I know for some people finishing a book is very much deadline oriented, and that's great for them. It just doesn't work for my mental health. Okay, so I will write my pages. The next day, I will go and I will edit those pages before I continue to write. Some days all I will get done is edits, and some days I will edit the pages and then write another 5 to 25 pages depending on how productive I am that day. When I go back and I do my edits, I like to do paper edits. So I'll print out the pages and I'll do it like in space and a half, smaller print. I try to save paper, but the truth is I just feel like edits for me come out quite differently when I'm reading them on the paper page than when I read them on the screen on the computer. When I'm in a rush, I will do computer edits because it saves time, because there's no entry that has to happen later. Because when I do paper edits, what I'll do is I'll take a manuscript page and I will read it, and any like single word changes I just use normal editing markings, and I will change words or whatever. But anything more than 3 to 5 words of a change, I will put a number with a little circle around it with a little caret for insertion, and then I get my Dana out and I will type in 1 and then what change needs to be made, and then 2 and what change needs to be made. Later I will upload all of those changes, and then I'll just cut and paste into the spots that my manuscript said 1, 2, and as well as making the single word changes I did on my manuscript. This may sound like a lot of work to some of you. To some of you may sound like way less than what you do. It's what I do, and it works really well for me. The edits come out cleaner. I see typos more clearly when it's on the printed paper. That doesn't mean I get every typo. I don't. My readers will tell you, that even after it goes through me, I don't know how many times, and through editorial and copy editors and proofreaders, there are still typos in the book. And some are introduced in the copy editing process, and some are just from me. I don't know. I just accept that there's no such thing as a perfect book anymore. I no matter how hard I try, I won't let myself get caught up on single onesie twosie mistakes in a book. That said, I don't like to read books that have a ton of errors in them. I don't think most of you do. I think that if there is an author who doesn't have a grasp of how to use commas or quotation marks, dialogue tags, action tags, how to break a paragraph, how to manage point of view, those things are important. That's part of the editing process. If you're not editing for those things, if you're not writing a clean manuscript, if you self-publish, that's a real problem. But even if you're trying to publish with an editor, you can't be guaranteed that an editor is going to want to slog through a bunch of grammatical errors to try to find the gem that is in your manuscript. So learn to self-edit. Get a book, or read an online article, or study on grammar. I mean, these are important things. Know how to use a comma, know how to use a quotation mark, know which ones to use for which publishers you write for. Quotation marks, I mean. Although Harlequin, Mills & Boon, which I write for, allows for North American editing, which I'm very grateful for, so I don't have to change my quotation marks to single slash quotation marks. That is the norm in the UK for their writing. So it just really depends. Don't assume you know based on a book you're reading. Know based on the books that you want to publish. So read those books. Okay, so that is how I edit. And sometimes I have mentioned in my previous video that I will go back over the first 3 chapters several times, and that is quite true. So like while I will edit the pages I wrote the day before and then go back and write some more, if I feel like the story isn't solid, I'll just go back from the very beginning and start all over again and do that paper edit again and again, and however many times it takes, so that I feel like I can move forward. I know the characters, I know where I'm going. So editing is part of my creative process. For some people, editing turns off their creative process, and it has to happen at the end of the book. For me, the end of the book, I try to do a full book edit. So I'll start at the beginning because there might be some small, inconsistencies or big inconsistencies, and so I will look for those. And on my self-published manuscripts, I pay for professional editing. Obviously on my Harlequin books, I have an editor with the Present/Modern, and she does go through the substantive edits, then it'll go through a copy editor and proofreaders, and that's an important part of that process. Your substantive editor is going to come back maybe with some changes they think you should make in the book. Now, it could be a lot of changes, it could be a little bit of changes. It really doesn't matter. What matters is, do the changes jive with how you see the story? Or can you make changes that will jive? One of the things I learned very, very early, and I was so glad when I I had this light bulb moment, because I'd gotten a letter from my editor, and she'd said these are the problems, and then she'd made suggestions on how to fix them. And I didn't like the how to fix them. They did not resonate with me. And it hit me that I could make the changes she wanted differently, that I could change fix the problem in a way that was not the way she suggested, and that was okay, because I'm the author and it's my story, and what she wanted was a fixed problem, not for me to write her story. She was a fantastic editor. She was very happy with the changes I made to the book. They fixed all the things that she thought were wrong with it, and it was a much better book at the end. And both she and I were very happy with the book because I made the changes I wanted to make. Now, sometimes your editor will make comments or suggestions that really jive with you, and it's like, oh, thank you, that's a great way to fix that. I'll go ahead and do that. And sometimes they won't, and as I said, then you come up with your own solutions. And sometimes what they perceive as a problem, you don't. And you have to decide as an author if you're going to dig your heels in or not. And sometimes you don't have a choice. One of the books I gutted that I did not want to gut was for Kate Duffy. She has passed since. She was one of my favorite editors. She was a wonderful mentor, but she really didn't like the heroine in that book, and it was really hard for me. And had I had a choice, had I been in a different place in my writing career, I would have said no, because I don't believe we made the book better. we made it different. And I really loved the book the way it had been before. That does not mean that I had a choice. I didn't. And so I gutted the book. The character she despised so much, I took, and I couldn't let her go, and I put her into Harlequin Presents. And my editor, Kim Young, at that time, loved her. And it became the book Blackmailed into Marriage. And so it's a very interesting, and I was dealing with the issue of vaginismus, and Kate didn't want me to deal with it in the single title, but in my series book I could. So sometimes you have to make a change, but you're a creative person, and just because you have to take a character out of a book doesn't mean you can never use that character again, or that maybe there isn't another book you could write for a different publisher that it wouldn't work for. So keep that in mind when you're making those big changes on revisions. A piece of advice I got very early, before I ever published, was from Debbie Maycomber, and she said it was game changing for her. And she said that when she did revisions, no matter how small, she did what she called whole book revisions. And that is that she would start at the beginning of the book and make that change, that little tiny subtle change, all the way through the book. And she said it made the book so much better, more cohesive. And she's right. Like, because it's so easy to go in and make a change in a scene and think that's the only place it needs to change. But if you haven't read that whole book again, because we forget, it could easily have impacted something further or been impacted by something earlier in the book. So highly recommend when you're doing revisions that you do what's called a whole book revision. I'm not saying rewrite your whole book. I'm saying reread your whole book and do your revision and do the subtle changes. Sometimes it's a word in a sentence that has to be changed, and that's all. Just really tiny things. They don't necessarily, it sounds like it takes a long time. It usually takes me 2 to 3 days to do even big revisions on a book, because once you get to know the book and the story, edits can become a lot easier. For me, they are, not for everyone. So it just depends on what your process is. It's always easier for me to start with something than from nothing. But for some people, it's way easier to start from nothing than from something. So now, as far as I've covered writing, how I edit, and I highly recommend doing as I've said, going back and editing as you go along for people who that works for. If it works for you, it can be a really efficient way to write, and at the end you have a much cleaner manuscript. But if you're a whole book editor, if you're the person who writes the whole book and then goes back to edit it, and you really need that raw process, it's not necessarily going to take you any longer to write your books. You're just going to have a longer time spent on the editing side at the end of the book. So don't think that one way is a faster way to write than another. Some people write fast and some people write slower, and some people write somewhere in between. And that is not, you can't make yourself write like someone else. You can try. If you're a naturally slow writer and you get push to get more books out, you can push yourself. But I do believe there's a cost to your creativity and to your mental health along the way when you try to change your own process to match deadlines or a publishing schedule that is more lucrative. Sometimes we have to give up the business side in order for the craft to work, and sometimes we have to compromise the craft for the business. And only you know where you're at on that scale, on what you're willing to do and what you can do. Early in my career, I wanted to make everything work. I had very different goals than I do now. Now I just love what I do and I want to be able to keep doing it. So that means I have to be able to maintain my creative well. I need to keep it full. And for me, the fastest way to empty that well is to over edit a manuscript or to make changes that I really don't believe in. So I'm always super excited when my editor and I agree on what changes need to be made in a book. It just makes me feel like we're on the same wavelength, and it's, for me, that creative process just flows more easily. Hope that helps with the editing. Happy writing.